Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. This is Courtney, the marketing coordinator here at AIM. Today's webinar will be recorded and later posted on our website. This does mean that all attendees will be automatically muted so that we can get a quality recording this morning. If you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll try to answer them throughout the presentation. But if we're unable to get all the questions, we'll have a member of our marketing team reach out to you individually to make sure we can get those answered. We do have webinars every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, so go ahead and keep an eye on your email or on our website to sign up for the next one. With that, we can go ahead and get started. So I'm going to hand this over to Derek. Go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Courtney. Hello, everybody. This is Derek here with AIM. First off, I want to ask everyone to bear with me a little bit. I am recovering from a cold, so if I sound a little bit different than normal, that is why. Today, we're going to be going over critical illness, cancer, heart attack, stroke policies, cancer policies, kind of a all-encompassing little area that has a lot of great products, that are quite honestly very needed in the marketplace with a lot of the clientele out there. And we'll dive into that a little bit, but also pretty underutilized. And hopefully you guys can see my screen there. So with that, we'll kind of go ahead and jump into what's going on with these policies. All right, so as I mentioned, with these, kind of really being needed in the marketplace, it's really hard these days to watch any kind of news source, whether that's, the actual news, social media, wherever you're at, and just kind of seeing what's going on with America as a whole when it comes to health. Now, whether you blame, pollutants, contaminants, plastics, our diet, whatever you want to bring up, things like heart disease and obesity are kind of running rampant across the entire country. And with that comes a whole host of other issues along, with what you're seeing in the news. So depending where you're looking at and who the source is and what the study it is that it came from, nearly 1 in every 3 women and 1 in 2 men are going to get some kind of cancer during their lifetime, right? It's not really a question of, if someone's going to get it, it's more of when they're going to get it. So it's one nice thing when you're talking to a client, right? And maybe they don't have, cancer history in their family, or they're not worried about strokes or heart attacks because it doesn't run in the family. But it's something where, quite honestly, with our life expectancy these days and living longer and longer and longer, it's something that's, gonna pop up more than likely, right? So 50% of the guys you're talking to out there are probably going to develop cancer at some point, right? 1 in every 3 women is going to get some form of cancer at some point in their lifetime. With that, the survival rate, thanks to, medical advances and people living through cancer more than they ever used to, living through heart attacks and strokes, depending on exactly what type, right? You're looking anywhere from about 50 to 70% of people surviving, right? These things that they used to die from. And with that, right, 80% of cancer survivors are having to use savings to pay for medical expenses, right? 34% of them are having to actually borrow money to pay for medical expenses, right? Because these are things that a lot of health plans, that you have out there aren't going to pay for different things. And there's a lot of cost associated with this that people don't think of outside of just the medical aspect, right? So having to get healthcare at home, having to get driven places, maybe even getting a pet sitter, right? There's a lot of different things, such as, maybe they're in a wheelchair from a stroke and they need to build a ramp or make their house accessible, right? There's a lot of things that people don't think of outside of the medical aspect where critical cash and, cancer, heart attack, stroke policies can really be a big help. Also, about every 40 seconds, an American's going to have a heart attack, right? That's not even getting into smaller strokes, different things like that, that can still incur some pretty big medical bills. You guys can see some of the stats on here. I'm not going to go into all of them. Obviously, it's not something you need to memorize, but if you are kind of, offering a solution to some people's worries about, some of these issues. These are good things to have. Most of these are going to be in brochures, flyers. You can pull them up online. They're kind of everywhere. Um, it's just a nice tool to have when you're talking to people as far as what issues are out there when it comes to health, right? And we're going to dive into this a little bit more, but what's out there, and also being able to offer different types of solutions, right? So getting a little bit more into what actually critical cash, cancer, heart attack, stroke policies are. Um, Basically, they're a limited form of policy that's going to have benefits paid out when you have one of the qualifying events, right? And we're not talking about ADLs here, or activities of daily living. We're talking about simple things like someone having a heart attack, a stroke, organ transplants, um, certain forms of cancer, bypasses, right? And depending on what carrier and policy you're talking about, some of them are going to have a lot more things that are covered, and some of them are going to have a lot less. The other kind of part of this is, like I mentioned, it's not going to be there just to cover medical costs, right? So if someone's sitting there thinking, well, I have medical insurance, it's going to cover this. This is also going to cover a lot of other things, like I mentioned. But beyond that, it can be used for basically whatever they want, right? So maybe they're recovering and they want to go on a vacation with family members, right? Maybe there's an experimental treatment that's showing, really promising success and results, and normal medical policies aren't going to pay for that, right? They can use this for that. So there's a lot of different options that they can use the funds for, and depending on who they go with for the carrier, a lot of them are going to pay lump sums. Some of them you can have it pay out monthly, as far as is what they're getting for the benefit. So there's different options there as well, for how they're going to get paid, how they can use that money. The other really awesome thing about these is because they are more limited, you know, when compared to what they cover, as far as paying out for the benefit, they're relatively low cost. They're pretty inexpensive. And as you can imagine, the more specific you get, like if it's just a cancer policy, it's going to be even more less expensive than having one that covers more kind of triggering events. So one nice thing when you have someone, maybe they're worried about family history with heart attacks or strokes or cancer, um, and they're not worried about life insurance at all, because a lot of life insurance policies you can either add a critical illness or critical cash rider, or sometimes they're built into it, right? But maybe they're not worried about life insurance at all. Maybe they don't want that, right? This is a good, inexpensive option for them to look at. Or maybe they do like the idea of life insurance, but they just can't afford it, right? Once again, this is a good option for them to look at, right? Because it's less expensive. It's going to cover those things that they're worried about, and you're able to offer them a solution for specifically what they're worried about, which is always a nice thing to have. Right? Excuse me. So, getting into the benefits, we touched on some of them, um, but as you can see, really, this is something that's going to be able to be used in a wide variety of ways. Um, the nice thing too is depending on who you're looking at, as far as me mentioning things like experimental, right? Ways to get stuff treated. Certain carriers either have riders or built into their policies where they'll give you extra percentage when you're looking at experimental treatment, which is always a nice bonus. Um, you know, Maybe it's something that you can only get in Europe and we're not doing here in America, right? As I mentioned, you can use this cash not only to get the experimental treatment, but to help buy the plane ticket. Um, if you just want to go on vacation, like I was talking about, if you're having to make, your house or vehicles retrofitted to be more handicapped accessible because maybe you're in a wheelchair or having to use a cane, there's a lot of different things that are going to kind of go in there, as well as just paying bills, right? This allows the person to concentrate more on getting better, finding the kind of care and treatment they need, and not worry about how am I going to pay for my electricity bill this month. Different things like that that are going to pop up if they're relying on just medical insurance, whether that's going to be through Medigap or through work or whatever age they are. It really allows them to focus on what's kind of going on and getting better. Now, when it comes to sitting down with someone, as I mentioned, one of the things you're really going to want to look at is offering solutions, not just products. This is a great product. You can actually kind of plug and play it all over the place, whether they're younger, older, whether they have a high deductible, plan G or whatever the case is, and you're trying to get rid of some of those out-of-pocket costs. There's a lot of different ways you can use it, right? But you can also use it, like I said, for younger people who may or may not be worried about family history with certain medical, issues. Maybe their grandparents died of cancer, their parents have cancer, they've seen it all firsthand, they've seen the cost, right? It's a really good solution at a really low price point to be able to make them feel better about if this happens or when this happens down the road, right? And like I said, it's nice to have different brochures, things like that, that are going to be pointing out a lot of what we talked about kind of in that, third slide, where 1 in 2 males are getting it, 1 in 3 females are getting cancer. More and more people are surviving cancer, heart attack, and strokes, and then they're left with some kind of debt from it, right? It's something that unfortunately is very expensive to treat, and even if you do have really good medical and it's going to meet all those medical bills, it may not meet all your other bills. It may not meet the other kind of funds that you need to be able to pay for things, right? So keeping that in mind is extremely important. Positioning the product as more of a solution to not just meet medical bills, but all these other expenses that people tend to forget about. Because, like I said, most people are having to borrow at least out of their savings, if not borrow money from a different source to be able to pay for these things to keep going. And as we mentioned, this is a really inexpensive product, right? Even if you get a full-on cancer, heart attack, stroke that has all kinds of, fun little riders and covers a whole bunch of other conditions, it's still going to be pretty inexpensive, right? And if you're looking as far as just a cancer policy, right, it may only cost $20 a month, right? So something that's really inexpensive, it's not going to break the bank for pretty much anybody, right? And it's going to give them a good peace of mind that they are going to be covered, when this happens down the road at some point. So positioning the product obviously is a little bit easier if you know why they're curious about it, where you're looking. It's something that has a very wide age demographic. So even if you're more in the med sup market and that's what you're pushing, as I mentioned, this is a good thing to couple with anyone who's on a high deductible plan for sure. But it also has a lot of good benefits at a really inexpensive price for those who have, no deductible, right? Because it's going to meet all of those other bills that people have to still pay, but they're not necessarily thinking about of when they get sick, right? When most people get sick, they think, oh, my medical's covered, right? They don't think about all the other stuff that goes into that. Excuse me. So getting into kind of some examples of what some of these policies cover. As you'll notice here, I'm not going to put any of the exact carriers we have. We have a ton of options. They're all within the same ballpark when it comes to kind of what they cover, what the exclusions are going to be, what their riders are, what the price is, right? So it's going to kind of come down to a little bit more of what you're really looking for and what area you're in to which one's going to be the best. So we can kind of get into that if you're curious exactly on what, carriers and products we have exactly, because there is a huge range of them, and we could spend probably an hour talking about just the different carriers and actual policies they have. So this is kind of just a general example, right? Someone can choose plan A, plan B, plan C. Some of them, cover cancer, strokes, heart attacks. Some of them are just cancer. Some of them are just stroke and heart attack. In this case, all of them have some other things worked in there, like Alzheimer's, kidney, paralysis, etc. Right? Um, as I mentioned, they can cover a pretty wide range of medical conditions that would pop up, which is kind of nice. Some of them are a lot more limited depending on the carrier and policy type you choose. As we kind of talked about earlier, the more it covers, the more it's going to cost, right? Because there's more of a risk for the insurance company that they're going to have to pay out. And with that, the premium is, of course, going to be higher. But you might have someone who really is only worried about cancer, right? And that's all they care about. Maybe they're super healthy, they run all the time, they have no history of heart attacks or strokes, they're getting checked out all the time by their doctor, everything's coming back perfect, and they just don't care about that, right? So the cancer route and then for them is going to be a better option. It's something that is going to meet basically or offer a solution for what they're worried about. And as we mentioned, especially with guys, if you're talking 50% of the guys you're talking to are going to develop cancer at some point in their life, right? It's a pretty safe kind of conclusion that it could happen to you. It's something that's going to meet that need, and you're going to have it covered. It's something that's going to take that off their mind, right? Give them a peace of mind, and they're not going to have to keep worrying about that in the back of their head, right? Here's another example, different carrier, right? So as I mentioned, the age range is pretty big. You're going to be able to kind of market from anybody age 18 to 89. Some carriers have actually term cancer, heart attack, stroke. So it'll come in like a 10, 15, 20, or 30-year term. Certain carriers, as I mentioned, are going to have very big ranges on the benefit amounts. So in this case, you can see 10 to 100,000. Um, and they're going to cover different things. There's going to be different riders you can throw on there. Some carriers either have riders, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, where if you're getting experimental treatment, they're going to pay an additional lump sum on top of that. Some carriers have you add that as a rider. Some it's just included, depending on the policy. But it's kind of nice. So let's, say they're at $10,000 for their benefit, and they're going in to get an experimental treatment, right? They're going to get 12,500, right? So kind of a nice bump in pay for going and getting something that could save their life, something that would not be available through just medical a lot of times, especially if they have to go to a different country to get it. um, most policies are going to have different restoration of benefits built in. Some of them are 12 months, some of them are 18. It really just depends. So while I mentioned all these policies are kind of in the same ballpark as how they're built, they're not all exactly the same. So something you're really going to kind of want to look at or call us and talk to us about is what are the exclusions, right? Certain policies aren't going to, cover types of skin cancer. What types of cancer do they cover? What, triggers the different benefits as far as heart attacks or strokes? How bad does it have to be, right? All these policies obviously are going to have some exclusions. They're going to have different things built in, such as pre-existing conditions, and they're all going to be a little bit different. So finding the right fit for whatever client you talk to is going to be important. The easiest way to do that is honestly just give us a call, right? As I mentioned, these are pretty standard kind of across the industry with, a little bit of difference here and there between the policy types. You can, to some extent, kind of treat them as a cookie cutter approach, right? You can go with one or two of them. They're probably going to fit 90% of the people out there. But you are going to have certain cases with pre-existing things, with different, you know, medical conditions that a client's worried about. That one policy is going to be a lot better fit than the other. And instead of digging through everything yourself, like I mentioned, give us a call, right? We can do that for you and let you know what the best option is going to be. Um, so the other thing too is when you're looking at these policies, while things are covered, there are going to be different limits as far as the benefit amount. So as you can see, heart attack and stroke conditions is going to pay out 100%, whatever the benefit is. If they get, for instance, a coronary angioplasty surgery, it's only going to pay out 25%. Okay. So, and this is going to vary from policy to policy, carrier to carrier. That's why I mentioned it's not the perfect, hey, we have this one policy that's going to meet everybody's needs. It's going to be a little bit more case by case, looking into exactly what's going on with the client and what we're worried about and what solution we're trying to offer them. As far as more riders and different types of coverages, some of these are going to have return of premiums that you can add on as riders. As you can see in kind of the example, a lot of times it's going to be minus the claims paid. So if someone paid in 10,000, let's say they use 50,000, they're not going to get anything back. If they paid in 10,000, they use 2,000, they would get 8,000 back. If they paid in 10,000 and have $0 in claims, they get that full premium paid back. The terms for the return of premium are going to be a little bit different, and not everybody offers them. In this example, it has to be enforced for at least 20 years, and then they can get that return of premium back if they wanted. So kind of a cool thing to add on there. Maybe you have someone who's on the fence, 50% a pretty reasonable kind of gamble, if you want to call it that, if someone may get this and use this policy, but there's still 50% chance that, hopefully they never get cancer and they don't have to use it. Well, this is something you can add on to make sure they get that, premium they pay them back if they want to. So that kind of makes it to, this is going to give them something back no matter which way they go. Now, granted, it's just their premiums back. It's kind of like a bad savings plan in a way, right? Where instead of earning interest by putting that same amount into some kind of bank account, right? The interest they would earn is if they have to use the policy, obviously it's going to pay out a lot more, right? So, but if they don't use it, they get all that money back, right? And in this case, 10,000 premium paid is a good amount to get back down the road, and they can use that for whatever they want. Another popular thing in the industry is TGen. Some of our carriers have this just built into the policies. Basically, what it is it's looking at your complete set of DNA, and they're building basically your own profile. You get a consultation with TGen. It's testing for a lot more genes than kind of the average test go for. So why this is becoming popular is depending on the type of cancer you have and your DNA makeup and what's going on, this creates a lot more in-depth profile of kind of the best way to fight whatever cancer you have. And it's something that TGen works with your provider with. So if this is built into your policy, you get diagnosed with cancer, you let your provider know that you have TGen, right? And they will work with TGen on figuring out really what the best treatment and kind of how to go about it is with your provider. And they work together, which is awesome. It's not something that you're going to have to be the go-between and kind of do everything. It's something that's just included in certain policies out there. And it's giving a lot better chance of people to, fight whatever type of cancer they have because they're getting a lot more information to the provider to figure out what's really going to work. So it's a great way to kind of set apart some of the different carriers and policies out there for who's offering this. And it's something to kind of keep an eye out for because it is becoming more and more popular and for good reason, right? It's helping save lives, it's helping people, overcome basically different types of cancer and beat it. As far as other riders, I mean, it's a long list. There are so many things that you can get added on here that, just depends on what carrier and policy you're choosing. But one of the other big benefits that we touched on a little bit that I just kind of want to, reiterate, right, is when it comes to getting the benefit amounts, most of these are going to be in lump sum amounts, right? There are some carriers where you can choose monthly amounts to be paid out to you as far as getting the benefit. Or, when you're diagnosed, you can just say that you want to take the full lump sum, right? And that money is the clients to do with whatever they want. Right? Once they get that, they could use it to go out and pay for medical bills. They could use it to go out and get, some kind of new experimental treatment. But really, they can do whatever they want with it, right? And depending on the carriers too, some of them can use, you know, because you can build these different ways. So some of them you can have different at-home benefit amounts versus, the care amounts. So maybe they're going to be at home for 3 months. They have a at-home, you know, monthly amount of $1,000 for 18 months, and they're stuck at home for 2 months, but they choose the full lump sum payout, right? So they're going to get paid $18,000, even though they're only at home for 2 months, right? And then maybe after that, they have to go to a nursing home, right? And let's say they have that at $5,000 a month for 15 months, right? And they're in a nursing home for 5 months after that, but they take the full lump sum again, right? So that'd be what to do 5,000, 15, 75,000, right? So even though they were only in, you know, at home for getting some care or different things from a stroke, let's say, and then they had to go to a nursing home because it just got worse, after a couple months. Um, even though they're only on claim for about 6 months, between the two different totals, it's about $93,000, right? 18,000, 75,000. That they're getting paid out, even though they're not going that full time period. And the other cool thing is, with the restoration of benefits, let's say they recover, it's another, 2 years down the road and they have another stroke, right? Guess what? As long as they've kept their policy paid up and in force, they're going to be able to, essentially do the exact same thing if they need to. So it's a really great option for people who are, worried about a stroke, heart attack, cancer, which in today's world is unfortunately gonna be a lot of us because no matter how healthy you are with us living longer lives, cancer is a really real threat, right? 50% of guys, about 33% of women, a little over. So 1 in 2 guys, 1 in 3 women gonna get cancer at some point. And even if you're taking care of yourself as far as, staying fit, active, eating healthy, working out, a lot of America isn't, right? And kind of flash back to that second slide we showed with heart disease and obesity just starting to run rampant, right, across the US. Um, it's one of those things where heart attacks and strokes are becoming more and more common, just like cancer with us living longer lives. And with how good kind of medical advances are becoming, people aren't dying from that nearly as often as they used to. And they're getting stuck with a lot of debt that they have to try and figure out ways to pay for. So this is a really good, inexpensive option that really should be being pushed or at least offered a lot more or brought up because most people are worried about these things, right? But they just don't have a solution, in their head that's going to fit what they need. And this is where as the experts we come in and say, look, we got this for you. It's really inexpensive. It's 20, 30, 40 bucks a month. It's going to cover all these things. We can put a return of premium on it. So if you don't have to use it, you're getting some of that cash back, right? It's a really great fit. And you don't have to break the bank by going out and getting a $250,000 IUL policy that has a built-in critical cash rider or critical illness, whatever you want to call it, right? That's going to give them an 80% return um, as far as the benefit amount, right? Because not everybody can afford that. Not everybody's worried about leaving behind a benefit to other people. Maybe they're 30 years old and single, and they're more worried about how this is going to financially impact them instead of others. And they want to not break the bank by paying for it, right? So this is going to be a really, really good option. Um, one thing I would like to point out is as I mentioned, we have a ton of different options. Okay. So with that, there were a few questions that came in. A lot of them are pretty specific as far as what carriers do what. So we'll be reaching out to you guys with the answers to that. Because as I mentioned, some carriers are a little bit more competitive in certain areas than others, and they offer different things. So with that, though, we will be reaching out to each one of you guys after this webinar to follow up, see what questions you have, answer some of those that were asked that we're not going to get into right now, and kind of just see what's going to fit for you. And if you are curious and you're tired of waiting, or you don't have time today, give us a call at the office at 800-672-7202. This one was pretty short. Like I mentioned, I didn't want to get into specifics with all the different carriers because it's going to be easier to do one-on-one with you guys. Um, but that's kind of the brief overview of why these policies are becoming so popular, why they're so easy to sell, a little bit of how to position them and what to look for, as well as really what they have to offer, right? Just from a general overview. And there's a lot there. So I just want to say thank you for everybody for being here and bearing with me while I'm getting over this cold. And I look forward to talking to you guys all about kind of the different options a little bit more in depth over the phone. And I want to say have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you.